This is a recap lesson for Conformity, which is a topic on your Behaviour Discipline Unit 2. So let's look at what conformity is first. Conformity is when we respond to what others want us to do without being ordered to do so. R.D. Crutchfield said it's yielding to group pressures. Stanley Milgram, who we will look at quite a lot, says it's going along with one's peers. And it can also be described as the informal laws which govern society's behaviour, such as social norms. And these norms serve as a basic function of human society. It lets us know who is part of the group and who's not part of the group. In class, we looked at a video regarding a waiting room, a doctor's waiting room. So to watch this video, go to PowerPoint 5.1 to see that. But let's look at what's the difference between conformity and obedience, which we looked at recently. In this instance, an applicant for the army who gets their haircut before an interview is conforming to what they believe the social norms of being in the army is. People have an association with having their head shaved and being in the army. However, if a soldier gets the haircut because someone in a position of authority told them to, they are demonstrating obedience. So if they do as they're told, it's obedience. If they're going along with what they think the crowd are going to have, then they're demonstrating conformity. So next we'll look at how does conformity benefit the Uniformed Protective Services. Well, the first one is following a request to perform a task. That if everybody else is following that request, we are more likely to follow along with that request also. It helps us comply with procedures that may become common practice. Again, police officers have very specific methods in which they have to follow if they wish to arrest somebody. It helps develop the social norms, and it helps their link to self-esteem. We look back at Freud, and when we are not in conflict with our self, we feel better about ourselves. The uniforms are a symbol of conformity, pride, authority. Uniform means one way, everyone's wearing the exact same outfit. We also have acceptance from our colleagues and other professionals. They know that we're all acting in the same way, we are behaving in the same way. We know we can trust each other because we know when times get tough and difficult decisions have to be made, that everyone is singing off the same hymn sheet. The conformity also helps give us a sense of belonging as well. Because everyone's acting the same way, we feel like we're part of that unit, that group, that family almost. And finally, it's putting the needs of the group first and foremost. Again, we are there to protect the public, and sometimes we have to do things which we do not agree with or we do not want to do, but conformity means that we will often do it because the rest of the group is doing it. For example, let's say we have to go out on a morning run as a recruit. Well, you might not necessarily want to go for a run. You're tired, you've been exercising nearly every single day for the past few weeks, you're tired, you're sore, but because the rest of the group are going out, they need to be going out as part of their training, you will also go out to try and maintain being part of that group. One of the main studies that looked at conformity was Zimbardo, and he came up with the Stanford Prison Experiment. So in class, we looked at this video about the Stanford Prison Experiment. So if you want to watch the video, go to PowerPoint 5.1 to watch this video. But in that video, it demonstrated how Zimbardo came up with this study. The study is applicable to both conformity and obedience. The type of conformity in this experiment that he looked at was identification. How people identify with the roles that they were given. It was carried out in 1971, and he is still a professor of psychology at Stanford University. The aims of this study, Zimbardo wanted to demonstrate the power of social situations on people's behaviour. He was trying to refute a dispositional hypothesis. He was trying to say that no, actually, is the situation are put in has very little to do with how we behave. It's all about the type of person we have. So he created a prison-like environment which was as psychologically real as possible. He then, the procedures of this, he then chose his participants very, very carefully. prisoners were arrested in their own home, and just out of the blue, they weren't expecting it, and that was designed to try and add to some of the shame of getting arrested. The difference between guards and prisoners' appearances was massive. The prisoners were wearing white smocks with numbers on it. They had a hair tie or hairnet to try and demonstrate as if they had their head shaved. They had a symbolic chain around their ankle with a padlock to demonstrate that they were prisoners. The guards, on the other hand, they had a khaki uniform, they had sunglasses, they had batons, they had clean clothes, whereas the prisoners only had the ones that had clothes and had to reuse them. The findings of this study was that the guards soon started to behave in an authoritarian manner. Prisoners became withdrawn, and in some cases more extreme behaviors were shown, such as hysterically crying, hysterically laughing. One prisoner even broke out in a rash all over his body, and in those instances, these prisoners were released early. The guards tried to dehumanize the prisoners by referring to them only as the numbers, and even the prisoners were only allowed to refer to each other in these ways. And the study soon ended before its official closing date because of the effect it was having on the participants. So the conclusions that he came up with says that any normal person, if they're put in this sort of situation, they would have behaved in the same way. He summarized that a brutal environment would produce a brutal behavior. That no matter who we are and what our moral values are and our upbringing and our learning that is happening in our lives, he suggested that everybody would act in the exact same way. Now, an evaluation of this study, if we look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of this study, it has high ecological validity, which means it should be able to predict real world settings. There's a reality in the roles. They had the guards had shifts, they can go home, they had the freedoms. The prisoners had to stay in specific rooms, they had isolation, they had limited amount of freedoms. So the reality of these roles were quite strong. And these are relating to both the social psychology, obedience, and conformity. So we can take a lot from this sort of study. And they had informed consent. They were clearly told what was about to happen prior to taking part in this study. Even during this study, at times, they were also told that this is only a study and you can leave. But again, one participant who was a prisoner, actually, even though he was having a tough time in there, he went back in because he didn't want to be seen as being a weak one in front of the rest of the group. So even though he could have left, he decided to go back in. He was conforming to the group. He was conforming to his role as a prisoner. Some of the weakness of this study was that it was mere role play, that they were, and again, some of the guards later came out and said that I only acted in that cruel way because I knew it was a role play. I knew that if I had gone too far, that the people conducting the study would have stopped me. And that's where another real weakness of this comes in, is the loss of objectivity. Zimbardo himself was the warden in the prison. He was playing a role in the prison, and he said himself sometimes he had forgotten that he was an experimenter and was playing the role as prison warden, not trying to conduct experiment, but trying to run the prison effectively. There was parts of it, there was this deception, again, how the prisons were treated, and the reason it was stopped was that it was starting to have psychological harm on the participants. So Kelman in 1958, Kelman suggested that social influences bring about change in attitudes and behaviors that may occur at different levels. So I mentioned that we were looking at identification for Zimbardo's study, but the lowest level of conformity is compliance. Then we move into identification, and finally internalization, and it goes from shallow to deep. So the most shallow form of conformity is compliance, and the deepest level of conformity is internalization. Zimbardo even suggested that some of the prisoners had started to internalize their role as being prisoners, and that was the deepest level, even though it was in a very, very short period period of time. So the first one, compliance, is when a person conforms publicly but continues to privately disagree. This is the shallowest form of conformity. An example of this could be a person might laugh at a joke others are laughing at, while actually inside themselves not really finding it funny, but they will still laugh because the rest of the group are laughing. Next is identification. So a person conforms publicly as well as privately because they have identified as being part of that group. They feel a sense of group membership. Now, change is believed to be temporary here. That if they were taken out of that situation, out of that group, then they would revert back to their original beliefs. An example of this could be when a person moves to a new town, they start to follow the local football team because they are in that town. When they go to work, everyone's talking about the football game and talking about the players. So to try and fit in with that group, they start to support that team as well. They don't have any necessarily links with that team, but they are for the period of time that they're here. Now, if they were to move town again, they may not necessarily follow that team anymore because they don't have that constant reinforcement from the group to follow that team anymore. And finally, the deepest level of conformity is internalization. The person will conform publicly and privately because they have internalized and accepted the views of the group. This is the deepest form of conformity. An example of this could be that when a person moves to university and they end up sharing a flat with a group of vegetarians, they may also become vegetarian themselves. And if they internalize this compliance, they may maintain being a vegetarian even after they've left university. So cognitive dissonance refers to a situation involving conflict between the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. This is when you would act in a way that you don't believe just because the rest of the group has. And this produces a feeling of mental discomfort leading to an alteration of our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. This is to try and reduce the amount of discomfort and restore balance. So when we are going against the group, it makes us feel really uncomfortable. The video that we showed earlier in the lesson was the woman was standing up every time there was a beep in the waiting room because everybody else was. And she said afterwards that she'd done it because she felt uncomfortable. And when she started doing it, she felt part of the group again and balance had been restored. We start to justify our actions to make ourselves feel better. This can sometimes overflow into denial and can move into compliance at the deeper levels. So when we have this uncomfortable nature, we refer to that as cognitive dissonance, and it's when we have a conflict between what we believe and what we're doing because the rest of the group are doing it. So how can we explain conformity? Well, normative social influence occurs when we wish to be liked by the majority of the group. So we go along with what we may not agree with at the beginning, just to try and fit into that group. This really just is following the crowd in order to fit in, to be part of the normal group. We then have informational social influence. And this occurs when we look to the majority of the group to see how we should behave because we don't quite understand how we should be behaving. A person will conform because they genuinely believe that the rest of the group must be right, so they're searching to them for the right answer. This can lead to a bystander effect. If nobody else is helping, maybe that's the thing that we should be doing. An easy example of this would be if someone stops and starts looking up into the sky, all of a sudden other people start looking up in the sky because they believe that's what they should be doing at that time. And like I said earlier on, some of the negative effects of conforming would be the bystander effect, and that would be the informational bit that we said earlier on. We looked at the rest of the group to see what is the best thing to do. So the bystander effect or bystander apathy is a social psychological theory that states that an individual's likelihood of helping decreases when passive bystanders are present and they're not helping. So in an emergency situation, something happens, if nobody else is helping, we'd feel like we shouldn't be the one to step outside and try and help. We've identified 3 different psychological processes which would actually prevent somebody from helping somebody in distress. The first one is diffuse